It is wonderful to see these new faces of the new friends, and of course seeing our friends and spiritual family that we have the blessing of having here week after week. Our topic today is divine providence. As I was mentioning to Marcelo on the way here, I was so glad that Susanna asked me to do this study today, because it truly touched deep within my own soul. In reviewing some of the aspects of what divine providence truly is and trying to apply it not only in the positive that happens in our lives, but also the negative factors that often our limited sight can't truly understand. But we wanted to begin with a true story. Number 7146. What is in a number? This is from the book Small Miracles of the Holocaust. I highly, highly recommend getting this book. Some pretty amazing stories told by those who somehow were affected by the Holocaust or stayed in the concentration camps or the ghettos. I highly recommend the reading. So his name was Jerry Simon. And of course, the name was changed to respect the privacy of those who were involved in the situation. And he first met Yehuda Feinerman at a kibbutz in Israel. Kibbutz were kind of like gathering or farm, kibbutz, farm in Israel. And the story tells that Jerry had fled the army after having been for a few months there, because he realized how much there was prejudice against the Jewish people. He thought to himself, just a few short years after World War II, and nobody seems to have learned any lessons. One hot summer day, the two of them were talking, Yehuda and Jerry. And Yehuda decided to roll up his sleeves because it was hot. Jerry noticed the number 7146 in his arm, and he gasped. Yehuda, noticing his surprise, said, "What are you staring at?" Kind of angry with the way that he was looking at him. He said, "I'm sorry, I don't mean to stare, but 7146 are the last 4 digits of my social security." So he said, "You can't be surprised for this fact." He said, "Well, in reality, it seems like a coincidence, no?" He said, "Well, if that's what you're excited about," in which Jerry said, "Listen, I know it's hard for you, and I care about you deeply as a friend. Can you tell me how you got those numbers?" So Jerry looked at him, Yehuda looked at Jerry thoughtfully, and he said, "Maybe it is a mistake for survivors to hide their experiences from the rest of the world. Maybe we were meant to serve as witnesses. All right, I will tell you exactly what happened." For the next hour, Yehuda narrated to him what had happened to him and his family. He said, "And then we stood on line at selection, my brothers, my sisters, my parents, and I. We were branded with these concentration camp numbers in numerical order. You see, I was next to last, followed by my brother. Afterwards, we were split up and we never saw each other again." The anguish in Yehuda's face was so deep that Jerry felt sad for having asked, and he thought to himself, perhaps those who have survived this terrible experience stay silent for a reason, because it is too deep of a painful situation to go through and explain their experiences. Many years later, Jerry left the kibbutz that he was working in Jerusalem, and he decided to go work as a tour guide. So him and Yehuda split up for a long time. He was a tour guide for wealthy Americans who decided that they wanted to be personally chaperoned around Israel. And so he had a lot of friendly people come and go, Brazilians, Puerto Ricans. But then one day, one American, supposedly an American, got in his car. And he was downright terrible and rude. The guy was domineering, rude, and harsh. And Jerry had to do pretty much everything to control himself and not throw the guy out of the car. After a moment, the guy, having been controlling and telling him what to do and turn here and turn there, suddenly said, "Stop the car." And Jerry didn't understand. He said, "What?" He said, "I said pull over. Look, you don't like me very much, do you?" So Jerry's surprised because he wasn't doing anything to cause the distress in the man. Rather, he had been quiet the whole time. He said, "I know sometimes my behavior is obnoxious, offensive. Sometimes even I can't stand myself. I apologize. It's just that," he starts crying, "I'm so alone in the world. You see, I don't have anything to live for. I've just about endured everything a man possibly can. I have nothing to prove of whom I am, except for these 4 numbers." Jerry looks up and sees the number 7417.
7146.
7147. Sorry. 47. 7147. Yehuda was 7146. Small miracles and coincidences. Are there such a thing? He looks at the man and he says, "You're no longer alone. I know where 7146 lives, and I will take you there." So when we thought about this study and the aspect of divine providence, we could ask, what is in a number? In the case of Yehuda and the obnoxious writer, everything is in a number. The smallest coincidence sums up what the Creator has in store for us. And so we go to this phrase found in the Gospel of Luke, in which Jesus said, "If you then, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Heavenly Father give the Holy Spirit to those who ask Him?" As in making a comparison between the Father on the earth and the Father up above. So we decided to begin with the story in explaining about God's providence, because in my point of view, one of the most beautiful chapters found on Genesis, Miracles and Predictions According to Spiritism, chapter 2, entitled God, item 20, Divine Providence. This is how they start explaining about what divine providence truly is. They say, providence is God's care for all creatures. God is everywhere, sees everything, and presides over everything, even the very smallest things. This is what providential action consists of. So then I ask you guys, could God truly be everywhere, see everything, take into account even the tiniest things, and be concerned with the smallest acts of an individual? We're talking about the Creator of the universe. There's got to be greater things happening out there, is one thing someone may say. I remember having this conversation with my husband myself. At a moment of sadness, he said, "God is in control. Jesus knows you personally." I said, "There's no way. There's 7 billion of us in this planet alone, not even considering the discarnate that lives around the surrounding of our planet. And then we take into account that there are many inhabited places in the universe. How could God care about my insignificant here? How could He care about the pain that I'm enduring when there is greater pain out in the world?" And it's a mistake that we make in not believing that God would definitely take the time personally with us to consider what our tears are truly all about. After all, what father on earth wouldn't try to dry the tears of a child or a mother? So, as we go on, we find out that in our current state of spiritual progress, it's kind of hard for us to truly grasp the greatness of the Creator. I get knots in my head, and sometimes I will ask Marcelo the oddest questions trying to understand God. And then he finally says, don't you have easier questions for me? Right? Because we want to understand. We want to know God. We want to see Him. And in accordance to Christ, only the pure in heart will see Christ. Telling us that when we reach that state of spirituality, the progress of the Spirit, that we have already detached ourselves from the material and moral vices, then we will be able to see God. But that does not mean that we can't feel Him and know that He is in control. Allan Kardec will tell us that a lot of the issues that we have is because we are still very limited. And so we imagine God to be limited as well. We picture Him as a restricted being and create an image after our own. I love that they chose, what's his name again? Morgan Freeman to play God in the movie Bruce Almighty. So when we imagine God created an image after our own, we do believe that God is selfish, punishing, that He's limited. Unconditional love, we are yet to understand. As a matter of fact, Chico Xavier would say that we still can't describe what a motherly love is. Maybe it's close to what God feels about us. Who knows? But this is what he says. It is this idea that has the masses thinking that they have been orphaned. Because if the Creator is our Father and He is no longer caring about us, then we've been orphaned, abandoned, put up for adoption, which in reality we all have when we reincarnated, by the way. We've all been adopted, okay? I have been twice, physically and spiritually. So we've all been adopted because our Father is the Creator, but He hasn't abandoned us. And we are not orphans. And this is the beauty of the chapter that brings this understanding. Allan Kardec goes further. He says, there are those who believe that God sits in an inaccessible throne up in the heavens. We have no access to God. But then, 2,000 years ago, someone taught us the Lord's Prayer, telling us that we could have direct access to God. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. He said our, He didn't say mine. Jesus didn't say my Father. He said our Father who art in heaven, showing us that we could talk to Him. And He would tell us to go and pray in the innermost part of our temple, within our hearts. You see, we don't even need to say any words. We can just be silent, and the Creator hears our innermost thoughts. I believe that at times it's important that we review this chapter, because often we feel that some of the occasions in our lives that go by unperceived or unnoticed by us are in reality God's hands guiding us and enlightening us and instructing us. And when we involve ourselves in the feeling of negativity, that we feel that we are less favored, the child that is less favored by God, that nothing goes wrong, that nothing goes right for us, we are missing the point that there is a lesson to be learned, that we have to seek a deeper understanding to be able to withstand the storm. And so we usually live our lives thinking that everything happens by chance. And we hope that luck will knock at our door when God is right beside us, working wonders, as Emmanuel says, on our behalf. As we go forward, we're going to see that there was a benevolent spirit in this very same chapter who came to try to let Allan Kardec understand, and in return us, because we're reading the book, that in reality, God's action can be exerted over the innermost parts of our beings, and consequently, the way in which the most subtle impressions of our soul reach God. This is pretty profound. Let's read it again. God's action can be exerted over the innermost parts of all beings in creation, and consequently, the way in which the most subtle impressions of our soul reach God. In a moment of planetary transition, it's important that we go back to this here so that we are strengthened within our faith. losing a loved one, financial instabilities, illnesses of all sorts, characteristics of a world of trials and expiations, we need something to hold on to. And so we know that within Spiritism we have a rational, something logic, and tells us why do we have the faith that we have in. It's not because anybody told us to, because we're no longer on those philosophies, no offense. But Spiritism promotes the being to realizing that he has the potentialities of the soul because his essence is divine. And because his essence is divine, he has the strength to pull the energies and move forward, even between a sea of tears, which often happens to many of us. The body represents a creation of which the spirit represents God. In parentheses, keep in mind that this refers to a question of similarity and not identity. Nobody here is going to think that they're God, okay? Although we are told that we are with small g. No, Elcio. You're God with little g. You can do a lot, but you're not the creator. Thank God. Imagine what Elcio would start creating all over the world. The part of the body, the different part of the body, the different organs, the muscles, the nerves, the joints are other material individualities, if you will, located at special different points of the body. Although, he continues, the number of these constituent parts are varied and different in nature, no one questions the fact that there isn't one movement produced by the body or impression without spirit knowing about it. If I move my arm, the spirit knows about it. The sensations, the impressions, everything, the spirit is aware of it in this tiny little world. A similar phenomenon occurs between God and the creation. God is everywhere in nature, in the same way that the spirit is everywhere in the body. It's a deep connection that he's offering us as a point of view of us and the Creator. All the elements of creation are in constant relation with God in the same way that all of the physical cells of our body are in connection with the spiritual being. He goes further in talking about the cells of the physical body. When a limb moves, the spirit senses. A creature thinks, and God knows about it. God hears us. We don't even need to act. We think, and he knows about it. God knows about everything that happens and assigns to each one what is particular to it. So I'm a little bit different than Sandra, and I have my own feelings, my whole tiny world within me, and she has her own. Countless existences. If we were to open her file cabinet of different existences and open mind, we're going to see worlds apart. But we are the very same to the Creator. We are loved the very same way. And those that we admire that are stars ahead of us, Saint Francis of Assisi, Mother Teresa, they are not loved more by the Creator. Because the Creator sees in each one of us the potentiality of the soul in the very same way. They've just traveled a little bit longer than we have, made different choices, which doesn't put him in a more privileged position before the Creator. The name of the spirit is Quinement in the Parisian Society in 1867. So we are constantly in the presence of the divinity. What happens in reality is that because we have somewhat of a distorted look of us, it seems like we live in a glass, things often seem to be upside down. Fearful to break free from this distorted vision and see really what is out there, we live in a constant view that our world is distorted and things are not in our favor often. And this distances us from the Creator. Reminds me of the little story of the little girl who's sitting on the floor playing, and her mother is sitting up on a chair and she's knitting. And the little girl looks off to what she's knitting and everything is messy because all she can see is the lines underneath the knitting cloth. And she asks her mother, why is she creating such a mess? So she turns the cloth around and sees a beautiful rose. She says, you're looking from a different angle than I am. So God sees it from the angle that everything is truly correct and in accordance with His providence. Providence, according to Emmanuel, he represents it in the most beautiful way, because he says that in order for us to have an understanding of providence, we can't distort it. Providence frees the asphyxiating atmosphere with the elements of the storm. It defends the flower with thorns, sustains the productive farm with smelly fertilizer, and protects the green of the valleys with the hardness of the rocks. What seems to be a big negative factor, a big painful thing, in reality, there's something amazing in the back end that we have to see and try to understand. And Emmanuel will go further and say that we need to understand that this also applies to our daily struggles, in such a way that we understand that behind every struggle is a prop for our equilibrium, for us to grow, for us to find balance. And I will use our dentist who's present here today, who can tell you that if we don't seek assistance when we have an ache in our tooth and it can get really bad, we could die from the infection. True? So pain comes as something that alarms us, tells us that something is not right. It's providential. It's providential. It's a moment of reflection for the soul. All of a sudden I encounter an illness and I can't understand where it came from. Even if it's a reason from a previous existence, we have to find in this existence what the lesson truly is all about. And sometimes we feel that God is not on our side. As the story of the carpenter. There was a carpenter who worked in a ministry in a church, and this church had been invited to provide material assistance to an orphanage in China. So crates and crates and crates were being filled with goods for these children in China. Clothes, shoes, toys, non-perishable food. And he was working diligently. He was poor, he was a carpenter, he worked hard to make a living, but he donated his time to the church because he felt it was important. Most of all, God would recognize his efforts. Well, the day had finished, and he finished packing up all the crates, and he left. When he got home, he went to search in the pocket of his shirt, and realized that his eyeglasses were no longer there. He figured, oh, I forgot it at the church. He runs back to the church, and then when he gets there, he can't find it. And he starts tracing back what had happened. He was busy working on finishing the crate when his glasses fell inside the crate. He made mention to pick it up, but something distracted him that needed to be done sooner rather than later, and he stopped what he was doing and went to finish it. Having forgotten about the glasses, he came back to the crate and shut it closed and sent it in its way. He said, oh my God, how could you do this to me? I've been giving you my time. I don't have money to buy an extra pair of glasses until next month. Why would you repay me with such ingratitude? And he felt angry. We got to put ourselves in his shoes, right? Well, months went by, and the director of that orphanage in China decided to pay a visit to the United States and visit the groups that had assisted with the orphans. And he went to that small congregation where that carpenter attended. He sat in the back with his wife, as he usually did, and it was a small congregation. And the director started thanking them for everything that they had done. In the middle of his gratitude, he says, I especially want to thank you for the glasses that you provided me with. And then he started saying that it was the time where there were communists and they were taking everything from everyone. And he said, even if I had money, there were no means of doing a new pair of glasses for me. My friends and I prayed because I started getting headaches, bad headaches that would keep me unable to work because I couldn't see. Until I opened one of the crates, and lo and behold, I see a pair of glasses. I put it on, and it was as if it was made for me. Everybody was feeling emotional because he was in tears. But they're all thinking, this guy's got the wrong congregation. We didn't send any glasses. Meanwhile, the carpenter in the back started crying because he realized that the greatest carpenter of all used him, the smallest carpenter, to try to assist someone on another side of the country, of the world. We see God's providence working in magical ways. He felt so blessed for having been able to be a tool in the hands of Jesus himself. And it is in examples like this that we start considering how everything truly is under control. The roles that is being needed, we start seeing it in the way that it's supposed to be. Life is no longer chaotic, hard to deal with. And we start learning that in reality, God's love is so infinite that He allows us to be an extension of this love between us, as this carpenter was, using the creatures as an extension of His love to work on His behalf. And we are invited to do the very same thing as we're going to see in this video. Lights, please.
An older boy and his young companion were walking along a road which led through a field. They saw an old coat and a badly worn pair of men's shoes by the roadside. And in the distance they saw the owner working in the field. The younger boy suggested that they hide the shoes, conceal themselves, and watch the perplexity on the owner's face when he returned. The older boy thought that would not be so good. He said this owner must be a very poor man from the looks of his clothes. So after talking the matter over at his suggestion, they concluded to try another experiment. Instead of hiding the shoes, they would put a silver dollar in each one and see what the owner did when he discovered the money. So that's what they did. Soon the man returned from the field, put on his coat, slipped one foot into his shoe, felt something hard, took it out, and found a silver dollar. Wonder and surprise shone upon his face. He looked at the dollar again and again, turned around and could see nobody, then proceeded to put on the other shoe. When to his great surprise, he found another dollar. His feelings overcame him. He knelt down and offered aloud a prayer of thanksgiving, in which he spoke of his wife being sick and helpless, and his children without bread. He fervently thanked the Lord for this bounty from unknown hands, and evoked the blessings of heaven upon those who had given him this needed help. The boys remained hidden until he had gone. Been touched by his prayer and felt something warm within their hearts. As they left to walk down the road, one said to the other, "Now really, don't you have a good feeling?"
apologize for showing this video again. I know some of you have watched, but it comes in accordance with what we're trying to say, that when it comes to divine providence and we are invited to be God's extension on earth in serving and not only being served, we go back to the gospel according to Spiritism, where he says, do you know, if God's providence has not chosen you to be the balm of consolation that must heal the wounds that God's justice had opened up? And of course, we're talking about the great law of cause and effect, where some people are exposed to these wounds. But if we're invited to be the balm of consolation, that's a beautiful expression and significance here for us. He continues in saying, therefore, when you see one of your brothers or sisters being afflicted, do not say, it is God's justice and it must take its course. In reality, go a step further and say to yourself, let's see what means our merciful Father has put within my reach in order to ease the suffering of my brother or sister. Let's even see if God has not placed in my hands the means of putting an end to the suffering. In the case of the two boys, when the man said a prayer in gratitude for that came from unknown hands, and it touched the core of the boys from the prayer that was enunciated. We don't know the kind of work that we can do within ourselves, within the world around us, when we put ourselves in a position where we wish to be God's assistant. Because that's what we're called to be. There is a lot of suffering all around, and our suffering is great too. No one is saying ignore the tears and the pain that is within your heart, but rather look for signs of divinity around, feeling the presence of God, strengthening and comforting us in every possible way, trying to learn to withstand the storm, because afterwards the sun always shines. But meanwhile, in the words of Allan Kardec, before all the questions that we brought in the beginning of the study, our reason must be humbled. God exists, and this we cannot doubt. God is infinitely just and good, and that is God's essence. God's solicitude extends to everything. This we understand. Thus, God can desire only our good. And that is why we must trust God. This is essential. As for the rest, let us wait until we are worthy of understanding it. With this, I will go ahead and open for questions or comments, and thanking you first and foremost for your attention, for being here,